hello YouTube. I thought it would be a very good idea to close off the Exploring Every Inch of Sage video series by making a tier list of all the videos we did record and basically giving my thoughts about the builds, talking more about them, and condensing everything into one video, as well as rating them based off a few factors, things like, how much damage they did, and if the damage surprised me or underwhelmed me is obviously going to come into play. But a big thing is actually going to be how fun the builds were. How likely I am to play them again. Because at least for me personally, I don't personally care too much about the performance of builds. For me, a much more important thing is just how fun it is to play the build if I want to keep playing it or not. But with that being said, before we get into that, I do want to do some honorable mentions of builds that didn't make the series. So I did end up ending the series off on day 8, or like episode 8, which was the Rain of Arrows setup. And the reason we ended up on day 8 is quite simply we just ran out of FE. I had quite a lot of FE to work with, but as the season has been going on and on and on, the market board has become like more and more barren, and actually like finding items to buy is becoming increasingly difficult and increasingly expensive. So I decided to cut short on episode 8, but I do want to talk about the builds that didn't make it into the series that hopefully we'll cover in a future series and just showcase them quickly to y'all. So the first one is this ES Stacker build. This one was very interesting to me. I think this build has a lot of potential, but I'm not a big fan of how I've seen people build it. So this build essentially is a strength stacking build that goes for like 6,000, 7,000, 7 strength, and then uses a false god with max life and max ES on it for your highest attributes, and then gets an absurd amount of energy shield using this tortoise shell distillate, because this gives you max ES based off your life. So if you have this, and you also have like Thread Remedy, you have just a ton of strength and a ton of like max life, you get an absurd amount of ES. And this build that we're looking at right now has 5.5 million energy shield, which 5.5 million energy shield is absolutely absurd. Because to put that into numbers, if you have 5.5 million energy shield and you have a Cicada shell, your Cicada shell, oh god, your Cicada shell is giving you 88,000 flat damage, which is times by 3 because it's elemental damage. So you're getting 264,000 flat damage from Cicada shell, which that is just an absurd amount. Wait, is that correct? 0.016 times 100? Yeah, it is. Okay. So you're getting 264,000 flat damage of this current setup, which is absolutely mind-boggling, as well as having 5.5 million energy shield, which is just an absurdly high amount of energy shield. I was really excited to test this build out. And the reason why I mentioned that, like, I think this build has a lot of potential in it is I do think when you have, like, this absurd amounts of energy shield and stuff, obviously when you have this much energy shield, it is very easy to just go, I want more energy shield, because making this number bigger is, like, really fun. But I do think if you, like, invest just a bit into other forms of scaling your damage, you can actually end up with a very, very potent build that has an extreme amount of damage, just by adding some multipliers with your insane amount of flat damage. But with all that being said, that was one that didn't make the cut. The main reason for it being that the build kind of, I think, looks a bit baity, and I'm also pretty sure, like, on a lower budget, it seems a bit baity, and I'm also pretty sure it's just gonna get fucking absolutely nuked out of orbit next season. I don't think this is gonna exist next season. So, why put effort into a build that is just not gonna exist anymore? Or like testing a build that's not gonna exist anymore? But I'll be honest with you, I'm quite a bit sad that we didn't get around to testing it, because I do think it would have been very fun to test. Just because of the ludicrousy of the build. Even though I have a feeling this is another case that's very similar to like Life Stacker and Mana Stacker, where on a lower budget, it just kind of falls a tiny bit flat. Then we have this focus hit-based build. So we did the focus rebuild. This build is essentially the same thing. But instead of focusing on reaps, it focuses on just pure hit damage. So this one's using acuteness focus, thunder focus, and flame focus. And then it's using whirlwind to trigger your focus skills. And I've seen some gameplay of this build. Like the person who made this variant actually has a YouTube video on it. And the gameplay just seemed absolutely super fun. It looked so cool to play. Like, this just looks incredible for mapping. So I was pretty sad that I couldn't get around to testing this one as well. And this is another case of, as much as I would love to try the build out, and as much as I would love to have like tested out, and I didn't want to do it. It was pretty high up on my list. I also have past experience doing like focus-based builds, and I kind of am aware of the fact that these focus builds just tend to be, they tend to feel really nice to play because you're essentially just playing a channeling skill and then running across the map while your channeling skill does all the work. But they also tend to just lack a bit in damage and lack a bit in performance. And like this guy's setup is absolutely mind-boggling. And they were only very barely able to like do SS21 3-star. So the performance to investment ratio is just not quite there yet. Even though the build itself looks very flashy and cool, which is why I ended up not doing it. Then we have Barrier Burst, which this is actually a build I found on the Chinese server, on the Asian server, not the Chinese server. While going through Sages, and the rank 20 Sage played Barrier Burst. And again with Barrier Burst, they just used this necklace that, this tortoise shell distillate, which gives you a ton of energy shield. And with that, as well as having a ton of max life, you would just get a ton of defense, and with all that defense, you obviously have a very big barrier. Because your barrier is 10% of your, this is a sum of 10% of your max life and max ES. And Barrier Burst scales off of the size of your barrier. This entire build is literally just barrier shield stacking. I know in past seasons, Barrier Burst has always been like a very like effective, cheap build if you... I think, at least from what people have told me, it's a fairly cheap and effective build to get a lot of damage. So I think it would have been interesting to test, but it's one of those builds, it's like, either people tell me it's like super expensive, you need to invest a ton of FE into it, like get it up and running and really get to get damage, or people tell me it's really expensive, it's really cheap, and it just does things very effectively. I don't know what's the truth. I kind of wish I could have tested it, but in the end, you know, it just wasn't on the cards, unfortunately for us. And another thing that's kind of a worry about the build is it does need this. Takes 10 true damage every 0.1 seconds, which kind of goes against the setups that we're doing, because we specifically wanted to do no prices gear and no dream mods. To just remove 2 variables completely while testing the builds. But obviously for this setup, I would need to like make an exception and be like, okay, this mod, this line right here is fine to have my gear because it's literally required for Barrier Burst. Because this is the only way to actually trigger Barrier Burst. Well, I don't know necessarily if I would say it's the only way, but it is the way that you trigger it in any build setup. Then there was also a Whirlwind build that I didn't get to. This is a Whirlwind build where instead of doing like Whirlwind just as a way to activate focus skills, your main damage source is Whirlwind. And this build is essentially the exact same thing as like the Ring of Blades build. You're doing projectile scaling because this Whirling Blade support makes it that Whirlwind has the projectile tag. And you're essentially just doing max channel stacks scaling. Or actually, sorry, you're doing min channel stack scaling because for Whirlwind, you specifically want your min channel stacks to be equal to your max channel stacks, so that you always have max channel stacks and you never like lose your max channel stacks. Because at max channel stacks, you do like a Seep Strike, as well as needing to get to 100% Seep Strike chance to begin with. So like that's what you do instead of doing max channel stack scaling, and you can do projectile scaling. But this build is essentially just a worse version of Ring of Blades. It gets way, way, way bigger area, especially because you can use Ghost Slaughters, and Ghost Slaughters gives you a ton of skill area. But damage-wise, I have past experience playing Whirlwind, and the skill's kind of just dog shit. It's a very, very expensive build to get your damage up, but it's very... Once you have it up and running, it feels amazing and incredible to play. It's just you need to spend so much FE to get it up and running. Then the last two builds I wanted to do was Armor Stacker and Strength Stacker Roa. Armor Stacker is very self-explanatory. This build was meta last season. It got nerfed a lot, but with Sage, you do have access to like a very, very strong armor tincture, and I saw quite a few people on the Asian server still playing Armor Stacker. So I knew going into it would basically be a bait build, but, you know, I have some bait builds on the list intentionally. I wanted to see how like a low-budget Armor Stacker would do, if it is actually bait, or maybe if there's some potential to it. It's always good to test things out, and rather than just making assumptions. And then the last thing I would have done would be Strength Stacker Rain of Arrows. The reason for this is quite simple. When looking at the Asia server Dragon rankings, pretty much all of the top people on Dragon rankings are actually playing Strength Stacker Rain of Arrows. You would expect them to play like Chromatic Shot or something, but at least the people who didn't have private profiles, I saw an overwhelming majority of people playing Strength Stacker Rain of Arrows, which is actually a very, very old-time build. Like, this has been meta for like so many seasons in a row. So I figured if I'm out of content, I might as well just test it out on Sage 2. So these two builds were very low on my list to do, as well as the Whirlwind was kind of low on my list to do. Whereas these top 3 honorable mentions, I'm quite sad I didn't get to. Now, with all of that preamble out of the way, which was quite a bit of preamble, I'm sorry about that, we can actually get into the tier list. Also, if you skip to the timestamp in the comments, hello, welcome to the tier list section. You didn't miss much. So, what are we doing for the tier list? S tier, the winner. Normally I would like allow myself to have multiple S tiers, but I think for this tier list, I'm gonna choose one build only to be in the S tier. And that's gonna be the winner. What is it the winner of? I don't know yet. We'll figure it out once we get there. I'll crown it at the end of the video. A tier, these are builds that I want to play again. These are builds that not only felt efficient for me FE-wise in terms of the damage you're gaining for the FE felt good. The mechanics in the build were really fun. The build itself was interesting for my brain to play around with. And I can see myself wanting to do it again just because I know that I'll have a good time then. Then we can have the B tier. I think for the B tier, this is maybe gonna be like, do we need a B tier? Let's do F tier. We definitely want an F tier. F tier is gonna be, I hated it. These are the builds that just fucking, like, I don't even care if it has good damage or not. The build just fucking sucks, man. Like, it's not fun to play. It's just the build mechanics just suck dick. And then I guess we can have a D tier, which is gonna be like, interesting build, awful damage. And we can have a B tier, which is gonna be good damage, awful mechanics. And when I say mechanics, I do mean the mechanisms that make the build work. So not necessarily like, you know, you're watching a ranked League of Legends teammates playing and they play like they don't have hands. No, like the mechanisms that make the build work. That's what I mean. So we're gonna start off. Episode 0. Don't really have much to say about Episode 0. Episode 0 is not really relevant, I think. It's just generic Chromatic Shot. It's the exact same as Episode 4. So I'm just not going to rank that. I just added it because it was in my folder. Episode 1, Ground Shaker. Actually, I do have some notes about Episode 0. So in Episode 0, I do have some critiques for myself about the way we did the setup. So anyone who watched the video obviously knows that I went off of basically TLI Compendium. And I went off of this like setup that Agrimorph did, where I copied the setup one-to-one. Any like restrictions that he had or didn't have, I copied one-to-one because I wanted my setup to be identical to his, so that I can have a one-to-one comparison of Rosa 2 to Sage. Not because I think that these two characters are comparable in any sense, but just because I thought it would be an interesting thing to do, because this was like the the like go-to Rota 2 setup that people do early league. And after having done that, my critiques of the setup is, I think the hero memories were way too good. I don't think day one of the league, you're gonna have fucking tier 1 projectile speed orange hero memories times 3. I just don't think that's gonna happen. I think that is a bit optimistic. And also then leveling them out to level 40, like that's a lot of FE for day one that you're spending on your memories. And while they do pay off in the sense that you get a lot of damage from them, I think a much more reasonable thing to do, that most people would do, is instead take that FE that you would have spent on the hero memories and just put it towards buying like your first core unique. And I feel that's also the case for the Kismets. Where like early on in the league, like day one of the league, if you're buying like attribute Kismets, you're buying orange hero memories, you are gonna get benefit out of that. You're gonna get a lot of damage from that. It is worth it. But it is an opportunity cost. Because these things are gonna go, realistically, they're gonna go down in price as the days go on. Especially like day 2, day 3, I think it's expected for them to go down in price. Because there's just gonna be more in the market and people aren't really buying them early league. And the cost of like your uniques in the build that you need, like your Omni Elixir and maybe your Death's Touch or your Malign Embrace or whatever fucking core unique that is that you want to buy, is just going to go up in price. So instead of like wasting your money on this, you should probably be aiming to get some core uniques from your build while they're still semi-cheap. And then another critique that I had is, I think a Gale Pedigree, it is just a 1-mod Pedigree, but it is actually like one of the most expensive mods in the game. Like, this is like saying back in Season 6, oh, just buy a Source Pedigree. Back when a 1-mod Source Pedigree was like 30k FE. Gale is just a very, 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 very potent mod. And whenever a projectile skill is meta, like how this season Chromatic Shadow's meta, Gale is just obscenely expensive, to the extent where, like, it is really worth it to, like, maybe consider using the Gale neck. I, of course, mean the one that has Cull on it. I forgot its name off the top of my head. Or even just speccing into Marksman and using a different tree altogether. I think speccing into Marksman is probably like the better option of the two, now that I think about it a bit more. So yeah, going on to Exploring Sage, Episode 1, Ground Shaker. So for Ground Shaker, I had a few critiques to the setup testing we did. I think getting 500% Demolisher speed like early into this, early into the season is pretty difficult actually. Because I think even like if you go by day 3 and stuff, prism materials are going to be somewhat expensive, and needing to like buy multiple orange prisms and roll multiple orange prisms to get your like Demolisher speed roll with a decent like size prism is kind of just difficult. It's kind of expensive to do. And if you're doing the setup of a 0.7 second rhythm, it is actually quite a significant damage loss. Going from 0.7 seconds down to 0.5 is a major, major damage gain for you. I think the damage overall in the build is quite low, because the build is very, very much crutched on the fact that you're using hammers, and that hammers have this incredible mod to them. That mod being this 55 to 62% additional attack damage after standing still. Because essentially, when you're mapping and you're running around, you're not really doing any damage. So every time you see like an elite or anything like that, you just kind of just stand still and like wait for your damage to come in and then kill the elite, and then you can move on. Which I could see that being annoying for people. I can see that becoming annoying very quickly. But on the plus side, I do have some positives to say about the build. I think the build is extremely tanky. I mean, in the setup that I did, like the base setup that I did, we had 82% max fire res, which we're also converting our fire and cold damage fire and lightning damage. Sorry, cold and lightning damage taken to fire. So you're actually just super duper tanky very early into like your character's progression. But at the same time, it's like, is being tanky really worth it? Generally, like early on, you just want to push damage to like get to like the next progression points rather than worrying about being super tanky. Just going faster tends to be better. But the build is also extremely versatile, and there's quite a few ways you can set it up. In the videos specifically, we explored doing hit paste, we explored doing true flame, and we explored doing Runa's Sword, for example. You could also, there's like other steps you could also do. You don't need to do, when you're doing hit base, you can do multiple setups. Like you can also do fervor stacking of Ghost Altars, you can do tenacity stacking, you can do Death's Touch with a two-hander, although Death's Touch with a two-hander is worse than the Demon Touch setup that we did. But with all of that being said, I'm actually a big fan. I think Demon Skills are really fun to play. I think they're really interesting to set up. I think having like the Demolisher breakpoint that you need to try and reach is really cool. And I like the versatility that the build offers, as well as the tankiness that it offers. I don't really mind too much about like the mid damage that it has, because I overall thought it was very fun to play, and I could definitely see myself playing it again even next season. Then on episode number 2, I just realized I said day for all of these. I should have said episode. Oh well. Episode 2, Life Stacker. So, as you probably saw my damage from this setup, I kind of just felt like I don't understand the setup. It felt like I was just missing something big. Like, I realized afterwards that I might have been using the wrong Euro memory. Because some people doing the Life Stacker setup, they just use this bottom trait, which is what I was using. But I also saw some people using this top trait, which converts your life's restoration into excess life. And on the mana stacker setup, you actually have to use this excess mana. You have to use this for the excess mana. So maybe like if I were to use that, I would have gained more damage, just because the excess life means I would be consuming more life. And by consuming more life, I would then be, doing significantly more damage. Maybe that was the mistake that I made. Unfortunately, I already moved on to the next setup when I realized that, so I couldn't actually go back and test it. But with that being said, I did feel like the build was very, very tanky and unkillable. I did feel really good to play. And I felt like even if you're like only doing 20 building, like you could probably struggle bust through some very hard content and just kind of damage tank everything and just be fine. And you get to play split shot then, which I know a lot of people love playing split shot because you get to spin like a maniac. But with all of that being said, I think the build is interesting. The damage is just completely awful. It needed a lot more currency to like feel good. Then next up we have Mana Stacker. So Mana Stacker is an interesting one, because initially I assumed Mana Stacker would be like just stronger than the Chromatic Shot, especially because the uniques or like the legendaries we were using in the Mana Stacker setup were significantly more expensive than the uniques we were using in the Chromatic Shot setup. At least like using the currencies prices. Now the whole point of this is not like using the currencies and prices, because the rarity of legendary items can change from season to season, and the drop location can change from season to season. It is not uncommon for an item that was once rare to become super common, or for a super common item to become super rare, as the developers decide to jostle things around. But with that being said, for this season at least, the Mana Stacking gear was way more expensive, and it actually did less damage than just not doing Mana Stacking, which was very strange for me. The build for me, though, felt very mechanically frustrating to play. The fact that you constantly needed to consume mana, and it just felt like I never consumed enough mana. Like, it felt like no matter what I was doing, I wasn't consuming enough mana. Even just standing completely still and spamming my fucking tango button, I just wasn't consuming enough mana, ever. And if you dared equip, like, a tango medium, your mana consumption would be so low that your damage would just halve. It felt very, 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 very bad because of that. And the only real benefit that I could take away from all of this to like give to the skill was the fact that if you play mana stacking, your life pool also becomes your mana pool. And you have a fairly big mana pool, and your mana pool just keeps growing and growing as you invest more into the build. So you end up with a very, very large hit pool, which I think can feel very good, because people like playing tanky builds. It's the same reason why Life Stacker is like probably very interesting for people, because when you play this build, you just become unkillable. With that being said, though, I do have to put this in F tier. I absolutely do not like the mana stacking like concept at all. I don't like constantly needing to consume my mana. At least with Life Stacker, I was playing a channeling skill, so while I was just running through the map, I was constantly consuming life to keep my stacks up. With Mana Stacker, I had to constantly stop and just like start casting to like generate or like consume more mana to stack up to do more damage. I wish I could figure out what like the fuck I'm missing in the build and how you're supposed to have like 100 like max stacks at all times while just running the maps normally. Then day 4 Chromatic Shot. I honestly have nothing bad to say about the skill. Chromatic Shot's just absurdly broken right now, and it just feels good to play. Like, the only thing I could possibly say about it was like a tiny nitpick, in the sense that it is a bit annoying that you have to lose damage for clear. Because both, like, using your Tangle Medium, which makes mapping feel 10 times better, because you don't have to stand still to cast anymore, or you're losing your third, like, one of your supports to equip the third slot support, which, at least, like, on tier 2 of no levels, isn't better than another support, and is quite expensive to, like, even get it. It feels a bit bad, but, like, you know, it makes up for it in just how much clear you gain from the skill, as well as just how much, like, quality of life you gain. So yeah, this is very nitpicky to say. Awesome setup, amazing skill. I think the Chromatic Shot rework was a massive success, even though they ended up making the skill, like, a billion times better than it probably should be. But hey, that's the valid position to solve for next season. I guess I should say this. Mana Stacker was good damage, but off for mechanics. It was good damage. I just hated the skill. And then episode 5, we had Ring of Blades, or the Roomba build. So the one big critique that I had for this build is this. You do need to use max channel stacks, because Roomba or like Ring of Blades scales offer max channel stacks. Now, okay, saying you need to use max channel stacks is a bit of a stretch. It's just max channel stacks is better than any other option you have. And not using max channel stacks is like, you know, you're losing like 4% additional year, 4% additional year, 5% additional year, 3% additional year. Where it does add up pretty quickly. You lose a lot of damage when not going max channel stacks, even though it is technically fine to not have that many. Early on in the league, max channel slates are extremely expensive. They've always been very expensive. And expecting to buy like 2 modded max channel slates is probably way more expensive than some of the other slates we've seen in the series so far. That was the main like issue that I had with it. Not necessarily an issue, but just like critique. And then another one is the build's very short range, doesn't have a lot of skill area, and you really want to scale as many projectiles as possible. So getting an early Scorpion Distill is pretty important for the build to make it feel a lot better. And as you probably know, Scorpion Distillate is by far the most expensive special elixir. So that is going to end up costing you quite a bit. But at least you'll be compensated with a fair amount of damage if you do so. With all of that being said though, this build was awesome. I loved playing it so much. I really loved playing it. It felt amazing. This build took me by surprise. I did not expect a channeling skill, especially Ring of Blades, to do this much damage. I was expecting the skill to like be nice, to feel fun to play, but you know, be a bit low on the damage meters and, you know, be like expensive and just annoying to set up, because that's kind of been my experience of channeled skills always, where it's like you need to invest a ton to get channeled skills up and running for like a low to medium payoff. So having a channeled skill that just fucking slams the damage and it's really fun to play, it feels really good. I'm a big Ring of Blades fan. Okay, and then we have day 6 Ignite. So this Ignite was an interesting one. In terms of damage, it was actually one of the lower builds on the list. It had surprisingly low damage. I actually expected a dot build to just skyrocket in damage and just do an immense amount of damage. But it ended up having fairly low damage. At least, like, without getting corroded uniques and stuff. But even though its damage was so low, the mapping with the skill felt amazing. like, it felt like you had infinite damage while mapping. It felt like your damage was bad. Like, the damage on this build literally felt better than playing my chromatic shot setup, for example. Even though the chromatic shot had more than double, or like more than triple the damage. And I believe a big part of that is just Ignite Prolif being so potent and powerful in this game. But an issue you might run into, which I occasionally noticed, was because your Burning Shot is a conal skill, you will sometimes just have like these awkward moments where your rhythm is just going to shoot the Burning Shot in a direction you didn't want it to shoot, and then you just have this awkward wait period until the next rhythm comes out. But that is something that you can fix by just investing into cooldown reduction and getting a lower frequency rhythm, so that you're shooting out your Burning Shots more frequently. And even with that being said, it felt great for me on a 1 second rhythm. Another thing that kind of sucks about the build, which it is possible to like work around this, it's just very difficult, is you kind of struggle to fit in Ill Omen. And I think any builds that can fit in Ill Omen should fit in Ill Omen. I genuinely believe that you should play Ill Omen on any dot build in this game. Because, at least in its current state, now that I played it, I think even on this Ignite build, I would have just forced it in somehow. Because Ill Omen is so unbelievably broken. It is so overpowered. It is by far the strongest curse in the game. It is deceptively good. It doesn't show up on the target dummy at all, but you notice it on all contents in the game as soon as you have it. And also, we were using a very specific hero memory for the setup, a specific revival, I mean, which is the revival where our dot damage has, like, every time we reap, the dot damage just gets finished for like 30% of its total damage. Which, that, along with us scaling Ignite duration, led to us getting quite a lot of damage from the, like, hero memory revival. And because revivals got added this season, we don't really know what they're planning on doing with it for next season. So that is something that's in the air, but, you know, people have been playing Burning Shot Ignite way before this revival got added to the game, so it will be fine. You just might need to build it a slightly different way. Overall, this build definitely surprised me a lot. Like, this build absolutely took me by surprise. I did not think I would enjoy a dot build this much, and it's one of those builds that I actually just want to play again, to be honest. I want to play it again. I want to try pushing it further. I want to see like what it's really capable of, because it just surprised me so much. Because I'm someone who's always been like a massive hater of dot builds. And it even got my hopes up for day 7 Flame Focus Reaps. I was on such a high after doing Burning Shot Ignite. I was planning on doing day 7 and day 8 double reap builds. As you can see, the day 8 reap build did not happen. I was not a fan of the Flame Focus Reap build. I think it's a very interesting and niche idea. I think it's just a really cool niche build. But it just felt like an ass to play. So the one big benefit of this build is you can fit in Ill Omen extremely easily with it. And doing mapping of Ill Omen, even if you're like only on 70 billion damage or 60 billion damage, if you're doing mapping of Ill Omen, it feels like you're running through those maps with like 600 billion damage. It is such a extremely powerful curse. It feels really, really good, and it is worth fitting in on any build you can. But with that being said, the clear on the skill felt a bit bad. So an issue the skill has is essentially you're creating a shadow swamp, which is a terra skill. So you're putting this like big circle on the ground, and then the enemies in that circle are getting ignited, which causes your flame focus to shoot out the melting strike, which kills the enemies. But you only have one terra skill. So you're just putting one terra skill down in a small area, and then the enemies in that small area are dying, and then the terra skill gets moved to like the next area, and the enemies in that area die. So the clear just felt a bit bad. It wasn't like the worst thing ever, but I couldn't just run through the maps and everything died. I kind of had to like wait at times for my skill to just start hitting everything, because it wasn't hitting every enemy on screen. The build also felt quite finicky to set up. There was a lot of moving parts in the build. and it felt like a lot of things felt half-baked. I felt like I wanted way more fire res, but I didn't really have any way to fit more fire res in. I wanted way more reap duration, but I didn't have any ways to fit more reap duration in. I just constantly felt like I wanted things, but I didn't have way to fit it in, other than just having a higher budget. Because as soon as you have a higher budget, you can start dropping some of like the unnecessary legendary items and just use priceless uniques instead. A lot of these issues would start getting like fixed, and I think the build would really flourish with a bit higher budget. With that being said, I think the build was very interesting. I just think the damage was a bit bad for like what it was. And I think with a bit more investment, the build would actually be like a solid B or A tier. In fact, I'm gonna say like it's a B tier. I think the build's pretty good. I don't think the damage is that bad. It's definitely not life stacker tier, but it is just the mechanics of the build just needs a bit of cooking. I was suggested by people who were watching me try out the build, saying I should just try like Shadow Storm Reaps instead, because they played the Flame Focus variant, and they think the Shadow Storm Reap variant is just like way more fun and enjoyable. Maybe I should have. Then Sentry Sage. This build blew my fucking mind away. I was not expecting any of these builds with these setups and restrictions to reach 1 trillion damage. I was not expecting to see a 1 trillion, but Sentry Sage made it happen. With no prices gear, I mean. The damage with multi-striking is absurdly good. And as soon as you get your Death's Touch, which the build really desperately does need Death's Touch to really get up and running, your damage is just going to absolutely skyrocket. And you saw it in the video. We had like 1.05 trillion damage with a non-Price's bow, and we had almost 3 trillion with a Price's bow, which is just absolutely absurd. And on top of that, the vault is actually very versatile. I only showed 2 ways of building it. I showed the multi-strike helm, which is like the new reworked item they added this season. Not new item they added, but they reworked Iron Sentry this season and made it that Sentry's gonna multi-strike. But I also showcased the Magma helm with like the True Flame variant of the build. And I think the True Flame variant of the build, it's actually very strong. Like, even if the multi-strike version wasn't like capable of working, I think this variant would be extremely potent. But the multi-strike version does kind of just outshine every other version of the build. But something else you could also do with it is like strength stacking, and you could do fervor stacking. There's all sorts of like ways you could like scale sentries, especially with Arrow Einarior just being a very like generically good skill. And I think the fact that you can like choose between the bossing setup and the like mapping setup, where for bossing you drop the swiftness, you use like the sentries that don't follow you around. Whereas with the mapping setup, you have the sentries like on your back following you around and stuff. You use the swiftness, and stuff like that. I think that's honestly a really cool thing to have in the build. I personally am a big fan of like being able to like be like, okay, I want to do bossing right now. Let me just times 3 my damage by just swapping some stuff around. Or like, oh, I'm going to do mapping now. Let's go to the mapping setup and lose off damage, but still have like extremely competitive damage. So overall, Sentry Sage definitely got an A tier for me. It definitely blew me away quite a lot. But with all that being said, honestly, I want to put Flame Focus in I hated it tier, because I really did not like the skill. And also there was nothing in F tier. So F for Flame Focus. With all that being said, we do need to crown a winner. Between Ground Shaker, Chromatic Shot, Ring of Blades, Burning Shot Ignite, and Arrow Einarior, which skill did I like the most? Now, I want to say which skill I'm going to play next season, but I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not going to make that decision yet until the season comes out. I'm probably going to make the decision on what skill I want to play once we have the patch notes. And even then, I'll have like 2 or 3 builds ready to go. And until the season actually launches and like I can see the prices of things, then I'll probably choose the build that I end up playing. Because I honestly wouldn't mind playing any of these builds I have listed here. I think all 5 of them are just extremely fun to play. With that being said, I think it's kind of difficult to not give the win to the sentry skills this time around. It's a tight battle for me between Ground Shaker, Ring of Blades, and Arrow Einrior. As much as I like the Ignite skill, I think it lacked a bit in damage, and I think Chromatic Shot was, well, I mean, already played the season, so it's less exciting to play the same skill again twice. But also the fact that I know it's going to get nerfed makes me kind of want to make the choice between Ground Shaker, Ring of Blades, and Arrow Einrior. I think Ground Shaker is a bit lacking in the damage department for it to really compete with Ring of Blades or Arrow Einrior. And between these two setups, I think the damage from Arrow Einrior just made it pull slightly out of Ring of Blades for me, as well as the fact that I do think the skill has like better clear and AoE than Ring of Blades does. But of all that rambling out of the way, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I really hope you guys enjoyed the Exploring Every Inch of Sage series. I worked quite hard on it. It took a lot of work and a lot of time setting everything up, doing all the testing, doing all the theory crafting, doing all the constant build changing and thing. There was a lot of like content you didn't see in the videos of me just experimenting, trying to find the best combinations and really trying to like hyper optimize these setups so that I can make them all as competitive as possible. There were only a few exceptions to that, really, where it was just some skills I just didn't like playing with. You know, the ones that are like low on the tier list, where I didn't spend too much time trying to optimize it beyond but beyond what you saw in the video, just because I knew I would never play this skill myself. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you all again next time. Thank you so much for watching, YouTube. Bye-bye. Bye, YouTube. Bye-bye.